My approach to mentorship, though, is one of compassion because for me, I think that compassion is the thing that people will remember far beyond the curriculum. I don't remember a single thing that I learned in the fifth grade, but I remember the kindness that my fifth grade teachers
Yeah.
showed me. That is going to stay with me for the rest of my life.
Welcome to Leaf Notes, the podcast that helps your business take root and grow. I'm Adria Marshall, seasoned business owner and speaker.
And I'm Sydney Mafuka, artist, illustrator, and small business owner.
Join us each week as we take you on a journey through the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. We'll dive into everything from social media strategy to protecting your business.
We'll even answer your burning questions such as, do I need a business plan? Should I form an LLC? Where should I promote my business? And so much more.
Together with our guests, we'll break down these topics into actionable steps, helping you build the business of your dreams.
So whether you're just starting or you're looking to scale, we got you covered.
So go grab your notebooks, your favorite beverage, and cozy up to receive practical insights and inspiration here on Leaf Notes. Let's go make your business dreams a reality.
Today, I have an amazing guest, my friend Min. They are an amazing artist. I believe they also work in graphic design, and they are also a mentor. And so I'm super excited to introduce you to them and for them to actually share their story with you. So without further ado, thank you so much, Min, for coming on.
Thank you so much
Yay!
for having me.
Of course. I wanted to start this off by asking you about your story and how you found your love for art and creating and even mentoring too, if you don't mind.
Basically, growing up, I'm from an Asian household, and we have this ceremony where when the child hits 100 days old, the parents will actually bring a series of objects in front of the child for them to pick, and that object represents their profession for their future.
Oh,
So there
wow.
was, it's very fun. It's a very fun tradition. So
Yeah.
basically, my parents laid out a series of objects in front of me, and my parents will evangelize this up and down that I was the smartest child ever because basically my father is a doctor and I picked up the tetoscope first. And for those of you who don't know, it's like that device that doctors use to listen to people's heartbeats.
Mhm.
And my parents were like, oh my gosh, our kid's going to be a doctor. But nope, I handed it to my father and they're like, wow, so smart. They know their dad's a doctor. And then I picked up a telephone next. And my parents were like, oh, is this like a secretarial position or something? And nope, I handed it to my mother because my mother is in fact a secretary. So they're like,
Oh.
wow, this kid is like, they're very observant and astute. But the final object that I landed on was a pencil and a notebook. And that was the one that I gravitated towards. And I didn't pick up any other object after that. And my parents always tell me that story. And they said, we were not shocked at all when you decided you wanted to be an artist. We have known since 100 days old that this is your gift on this earth. So,
Wow, that's
and then
amazing.
from there, yeah. And then from there, I just like, it really was like my favorite thing to do. I would always be doodling in class. And um, I I was big into it in high school, but I had this really interesting catastrophic event that made me quit art for 5 years and then redo art again in my undergraduate degree when I was around 21, 22 years old. I retaught myself art well enough to go into a master's degree program for it out of the blue. And then I graduated representing my department, which was kind of crazy.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
here we are now.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. But yeah, and then here we are now. I'm a working graphic designer, I'm a working artist, and I'm also a mentor. So it's a lot of things, but it's been a fun journey to get here.
So if you don't mind me asking, what made you sort of drop the art for your undergrad degree, and then what made you pick it back up?
Oh, that's a great question. At the time it was like a really interesting story. So in high school, I was painting murals a lot, like a lot. And it was kind of wild. I was like 16 years old, but the school trusted me to like lead mural projects, which was quite an honor, honestly. But it was for me a very special time because it was a space for me to grow and learn what it was like to be an artist working professionally at 16 years old. And it was a very special time. It was a time where I felt very engaged with school, which I typically don't, frankly. Like, I was never like a studious person, to be perfectly frank. I actually struggled a lot in school. I was in a lot of remedial classes, and I felt to be very blunt, very overlooked and treated like an aftermath by the entire like education system because, a remedial child is frankly a harder child to educate than one that is excelling, right? They need extra attention, extra space, and sometimes people don't want to give those resources out.
Mhm.
So I felt very discouraged by school. I felt very I don't want to say resentful, but I felt just very like jaded by school. I think that's a better terminology to use. But when I was painting, it's very much a meditative experience. It's very much a space where I can be my own person. I can explore how I need to explore. And painting murals for the school, it was something very beautiful. And my last mural was the one that I had all to myself. It was the one that I got to pick the idea. The teacher trusted me. I even raised the money for it. Like I sold candy bars for like
Mhm.
6 months before I even painted the mural because I had to raise my own money for my own art supplies. And my parents, I love them to death. They drove me to school every day at like 6 a.m. in the morning for me to do this mural, and then like 7 o'clock at night. So I would work on it in between my lunch breaks. My after school, I became friends with the janitor who like unlocked the school for me for me to go in. And I think what made it all the more painful was when it was painted over the summer, and I
Mhm.
never even got to take a final photo of it.
Mhm.
And basically, the reasoning for it was this new teacher. I won't give his name, but he essentially moved into the classroom where the old teacher was, and he painted over it. And it's one thing, to paint over it, like just the standard white concrete of like, a typical public school building, but he painted over it and plastered his UGA paraphernalia all over it, which was like a very it felt just very dismissive. And I want
Mhm.
to, give a huge disclaimer that I'm pretty sure his actions had no malice behind it, but I think
Mhm.
it's very telling that it really shows how society devalues artistic labor. And that was, I think, the first time I experienced the full magnitude of what it means to have my labor completely and utterly devalued. Because I worked on that mural by myself, like every day for like essentially 9 months, because I had to spend the first 3 or 4 months, actually honestly 6 months, just raising the money to even paint the
Mhm.
mural, selling candy bars. So the actual painting process was like 3 months of my labor because I'm new to it. I'm 16 and it's my first time doing it, 16, 17. So it's like all of that didn't matter, right? And it felt, it was just a heartbreak. Like when I have
Mhm.
never cried over like a relationship more than I've
Mhm.
cried over the loss of that mural, because I came back to take a picture of it. I didn't
Mhm.
even get a picture of it, a final photo of it, because I thought it was still going to be there. But no, I don't even have a photo of the final product because it was painted over before I could even see it. And I literally, when I tell you, I threw away my application to go to college in
Yeah.
art school. I threw it away right then and there. And I just went to pursue a degree in English instead because that was my second greatest love. And I just said, you know what, this maybe is, it was like it was felt like a sign from the universe that it wasn't my
Mhm.
time. It wasn't my space, if that makes sense.
And so what made you want to pick it back up again then? What changed?
I felt, I know I want love English, by the way. I love,
Mhm.
love, love English. I write poetry in my spare time when I'm not drawing now. I do love English,
Mhm.
but it wasn't fulfilling me emotionally,
Mhm.
spiritually, as much as art was. I felt like, I don't want to sound melodramatic, but I felt like there was a deep, like, spiritual hole in me,
Mhm.
I felt like there was just something missing in my life. I started off just doodling in my sketchbooks, and honestly, my English teachers, they thought it was really endearing that I would sometimes illustrate the stories that I wrote for classes. And it was like every chance I get, I just kept drawing and drawing, and I'm like, I'm not, researching English as much as I am drawing. It's like what you do in your spare time is very telling about like where your
Mhm.
energies and where your passions are going.
I think your story and your life experience with this mural and how it affected the direction that you took is very similar to a lot of stories that artists face when they're at a point at a crossroad of picking, am I going to pursue this for real or am I going to do something more practical and
Mhm.
something more accepted by society, And so your story, that's really something that's real because I think although we can see art everywhere in society, from graphic design, from murals in Atlanta, from like writings and books and stuff like that, it's so funny how there still does feel like there's this lack of appreciation for it. Yeah. So you're not
Right.
alone.
Oh yeah, and like it's so wild. Like I remember like during that time because it was my first, I would consider that my first heartbreak, honestly. Like
Mhm.
more than any person I've ever dated, that I cried for like a week straight. Like my friends, I have the best friends on the planet, by the way. Like they or are artists as well. One of them actually works in animation to this day. And like they had to physically get me out of bed and like
Mhm.
quite literally bring me food. Like I was not eating, I was not sleeping. I was just literally crying for like days. And they actually confronted the teacher and they wrote him, they were very nice about it. Like again, everyone was very professional and very sweet
Mhm.
about the whole ordeal. Like they actually came to him because I was so emotionally like catatonic at that time. I was like just in my bed. But they confronted him and very politely, very respectfully,
Mhm.
and they just said like, hey, like, you know, we just want you to know how this impacted the artist who did this. And his, you know, and this is all alleged, like this is, I wasn't there, but they were saying like, you know, he felt very bad about the whole
Yeah.
thing. He didn't know how much it would affect me, but
Right.
also he said like it felt like it wasn't for him. It
Mhm.
wasn't like this was, I like I did it for the other teacher, which is, if I'm gonna like say it, I was, no, it was not for the other teacher. I did it for the school. I did it for future generations who would sit there. And again, it's like that lack of insight and the
Mhm.
lack of like care. You know, it's like the lack of care. That's what hurt. And that's something that I think artists experience all the time, is that the lack of insight, the lack of, you know, care for artistic labor, how it can just be so easily dismissed.
Mhm.
And it's sad. It really is sad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like there's been times where some close people around me would be like, You're just drawing." And it's like
Mhm.
actually that's mental, almost spiritual, as woo-woo as it may sound, but it's very
Mhm.
emotional process, that takes a
Absolutely.
lot of energy and
Mhm.
also takes an effect on your body, which is why I have the standing desk now. It helps a lot. But I don't think people connect the two, that art does take so much actual physical
And a mental toll.
and mental toll,
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
like any other
Mental.
job.
Right. If
um
not more so, because you're really pouring yourself out into your work. I'm not an
mhm,
artist, but
Mhm.
I've seen Sydney do her work, and you are pouring a piece of you out into the work. So I know, Sydney, you've had trouble. Well, not trouble, but it was a challenge at first when you're getting feedback, because it's like someone is criticizing you when they are giving feedback on your work. So I totally get it.
yeah, for sure. I think
Absolutely.
and you can tell me your opinion, because maybe we should talk about art school. This wasn't on my
I
thing,
know,
but I'm
let's do
very
it.
interested. So since you got your master's in, was it illustration? I feel like I saw you
Yeah,
in
it
some of my
was. It was
illustration
illustration.
classes. um, but yeah, so you got your master's in illustration. How did art school impact the way that you approach art?
Oh, that's a great question. Definitely, I think there's two layers to it. I think that there's a social layer and then there's like an academic layer and a very professional approach to it. I think the best thing I learned out of art school was just honestly to maintain a proper organization that I just didn't have. Like, I didn't quite understand how to organize my layers. I didn't understand how to organize a lot of my mood boards, and I didn't even know how to make a mood board. So for me, I was completely self-taught up until my master's degree, which is very hard to believe for a lot of people because it really was like the last year of my undergraduate degree. I spent just that entire year reteaching myself art. So I was very much in the mental headspace of like, I am my own professor, I am my own mentor, I am my own like, you know, authority figure, my own syllabus maker, et cetera, et cetera. So now it was like this space of like, I need to take a step back and then let someone else mentor me or guide me,
Mhm.
right? Which
Mhm.
is in and of itself a vulnerable space to be in when you've kind of like been so independent for so long. So that was interesting. I think my greatest experience was actually in the animation department, working along with a collaborative space in a team environment. It was really one of the most synchronized activities I ever had to perform, was working on animated films, because it's like, it's one thing, right, to make a beautiful work of art, but it's another thing to make a beautiful work of art that is functional in the context that it's meant to be in, right?
Mhm.
So, for example, the art that, like, you know, we do in graphic design is fundamentally different than the art that is meant for a museum space. And both are equally valid, but the context is what matters. And I think that's where a lot of young professionals kind of struggle with that, understanding context and understanding where their art fits into this vast, beautiful space that we have in the market.
For sure, that was beautifully said. The reason why I asked about art school is because to kind of pinpoint really quick off of what Mom said about critiques, I've gotten so many valuable critiques from art school, some that made me cry, but in the way where you cry and you're like, I got this, I'm gonna get back up and I'm gonna do what they said to do. And then it like completely transformed your work
Mhm,
in a way that you didn't even think you could achieve so quickly, you know? So,
mhm,
but I can't relate to the animation space, but definitely in illustration. I think it did help to be in a school where I could see where my work would actually fit. What would it look like if my work was, if I took on a project and it was a poster or something like that? Or,
mhm.
because, illustration is interesting.
Illustration is such a catch-all, right? Like, 'cause, like, honestly, illustrators are kind of everywhere. They're like, they can be muralists, they can be UX designers, UI designers, they can be essentially almost anywhere in the artistic space pretty
Mhm.
easily and fluidly, which I think that's what drew me to the department initially.
Do you feel like art school is necessary for someone to be a successful artist? And I'm only asking this because, you mentioned that you were self-taught for a giant portion of the time. Do you feel like if hadn't you gotten your master's, you would be pursuing art and graphic design today?
That is, I thought about that question quite extensively, actually. So for me, right, I made the executive decision to go into master's degree because I realized I've hit this critical point where there's only so much that I can teach myself, and you don't know what you don't know, right? Like you just don't know what you don't know. So at that point, when I hit that catalyst, I'm like, okay, I think I need professional guidance. So I cannot speak for everybody, right? Because I think everyone is a very unique learner and everyone learns very differently. But I gained the most from a mentorship like situation. So I had this wonderful teacher at SCAD. I will give his name. He doesn't teach there anymore currently, but we still talk very regularly. His name is Tinus Van Ruin. What a cool name already, right? So he's a lovely man, but basically he was my not my tutor, my teacher and my advisor when I was at SCAD. He was also on my thesis committee. And having just that one-on-one kind of relationship, take advantage of office hours, right? Because for me,
Mhm.
I learned the most in a one-on-one setting versus a classroom setting.
Mhm.
And I think he was the greatest, I think, influence, the greatest mentor, the greatest friend I think I ever made at that school. Honestly, I think that's what made it worth it for me was just being in a mentorship kind of space and being able to even mentor some other students at SCAD. That was, breathtaking. That's a beautiful experience for me. So to answer the question, I think definitively, I would say art school, it depends on who you are. That is not something that I can say is a one size fit all for everybody.
Mhm.
I would say that it is something that you need to ask yourself quite seriously because it is a huge financial commitment as well. So for me, art school, I think, is the best for using the tools that you'll need for art, number one, because you're exposed to so many beautiful equipment like that you cannot find very readily, right? Like Wacom tablets, like very powerful Cintiqs that you can use for drawings, animation equipment. Honestly, we had film crew equipment there. It was great
Mhm.
for its utilities. Number two is networking because these people,
Mhm.
we need to understand that school is a transitory space. These people are not going to be students forever, or one should hope not. Like, not, well, you should always be studying, but
Mhm.
not like in a school environment forever. These people will be your colleagues one day, so this is the space where you need to stop seeing these people as your students, your fellow students, and you need to see them as your future colleagues.
Mhm.
So that's my best advice right there. So make connections,
Mhm.
make connections. The grades, oh, this is like maybe a hot take, but the grades are secondary, if not tertiary, to those
Mhm.
two other aspects, in my personal opinion.
Very well said. And shout out to teachers. I think the guest that we had on the show yesterday was also talking about what a great impact that one of her teachers made in her life. So
Mhm.
when you find a good one, it's just like amazing, right? The connection that you make and
Mhm.
the fact that
Absolutely.
that he is a mentor for you still now is absolutely
Mhm.
amazing too. I have a question for you. So I am a mentor also. So I want to hear more about about how you got into being a mentor. I would imagine, I'm projecting, but I'm imagining that's because you've had so many great mentors in your life that maybe that led you to being a mentor. I'm just guessing. So I want to hear about that. And then I want to hear kind of your like approach to being a mentor, because I think each one has a unique style.
So that's a great question. So for me, I am very old school. I am a very old school person. But I believe, like, basically back in like ancient times, like in China, in Vietnam, in like old times, like, my parents always told me, your parents are here, but sometimes the mentor and the teacher is like almost a level above the parents because
Mm-hmm.
they are fostering your dreams. They are fostering your future. That is something that, sometimes a parent cannot do for a child. So a mentor is, I take that role very seriously because it is something that is ingrained very deeply in my culture. So for me, a mentorship is really someone who is fostering a dream. You're giving breath to someone's possibly their future for the rest of their life. So that's not something that I take very lightly at all. My approach to mentorship, though, is one of compassion because for me, I think that compassion is the thing that people will remember far beyond the curriculum. I don't remember a single thing that I learned in the fifth grade, but I remember the kindness that my fifth grade teachers
Yeah.
showed me. That is going to stay with me for the rest of my life is
Mm-hmm.
how someone spoke to me and how someone is treating me, right? So, one thing that I do in an individual setting is I understand and I fully acknowledge that my students, most of them are adults. And I think what's very specific about my case is that my students that I mentor are actually a lot of students that are in STEM careers. They are in the medical field, they're in hard, like scientific STEM jobs, and their
Mm-hmm.
jobs are very stressful, very demanding, where sometimes it really is life or death on the line for them. And sometimes they can't finish my coursework. I'm not gonna like, say like, oh, well, you should be making my class the top priority. That's not compassion, right? That is not compassion. I am fully, my class it should be a priority, but it's not the ultimate priority, right? Like for me, this class, it's almost like a safe space for them to be away from their high demand job, but also for them to explore themselves emotionally, spiritually, however they need to explore themselves. I need to give them space to do that however they need to, while also learning and also preparing them to enter a field that they might want to enter. When I'm in a larger classroom setting, sometimes when my students kind of interact and mingle with each other, I do believe in something called what I like to call discrete discipline, right? So for me, whenever I'm in a larger setting, I like to do a classroom dedication or a classroom gratitude moment where I will dedicate the classroom to an ancestor. So basically, I will have one student, they will come up and be like, this class is dedicated to my grandmother, and they will say something, or their aunt, or their mother, or their whoever. So if you're texting in that class, you're disrespecting that person's grandmother, their aunt,
Mm-hmm.
their whoever. You're disrespecting their lineage, right? And because I
Mm-hmm.
want my students to also understand that they are not just a singular human being, they are a living lineage. They
Mm-hmm.
are connected to every ancestor and they're right there with you, cheering you on every step of the way. So that's something that I also like to do in my classrooms is I don't like to do I call it like an iron fist underneath a silk glove, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well said. Are you getting emotional? Why am I getting a little
Oh yeah,
emotional?
that
I
one got me.
know. It got me too.
Sorry.
It was the ancestor
It
for
was the
me.
answer.
Sorry.
I'm like, oh man, and
Yeah.
being a walking lineage.
Yeah. I
That
love that
oh my
so much.
gosh,
I'm going to have to steal that.
you are
I
mom.
am going
Go
to
for it.
steal that.
I was
Go for it.
listening to what you were saying. I'm like, mom, there's some things you could pick up.
Man, absolutely. It's good stuff.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Because I remember, when I was younger, I have an ancestral shrine in my home, and before I would leave to go to school every day, I would actually bow 3 times to my ancestors, and it was just a reminder that I am not a singular human being. I'm interconnected with my lineage. I'm interconnected with every single human that I interact with, and I need to act accordingly. So I take
Mhm.
that philosophy very deeply into the way I conduct myself in my classroom with my students, and the way that I expect them to conduct with each other.
Well said.
Well said, beautifully said. I wanted to know something that I've noticed in your work, or at least recently, since we follow each other on Instagram, is that you do a lot of illustrations now that sort of teach people about Vietnamese culture and like different things, which is super cool. And I want to know, like, because it seems like you're writing. also has kind of contributed to, or at least your love for writing has contributed to the way that you approach art right now, at least in that way. And I wanted to know what was
Mhm.
your journey into connecting the two, because now it's like your undergrad and your grad kind of like
Had a
had a
baby.
baby, and this is what it is.
You're right, it did. Well, that's a great question too. These are all phenomenal questions, by the way. I had a very good time reading them over, and I had to think of very like astute answers for them. But anyways, I think this when I came across that question, I had to really think about it because I think for me, the reason why I started drawing these images is because I think that for a lot of people, they feel so disconnected from their heritage, their lineage. And I am certainly one of those people. I think that when we live in a society like America, right, where assimilation is kind of the model that we've been using for centuries of assimilating into this kind of homogenous quote unquote American identity, a lot of things get kind of lost along the way. And
Mhm,
it's like the sacrifices that we make culturally in order for, financial gains or stability, at what cost? You know what I mean? We have lost a bit of our spirit. And if I can help someone reclaim an aspect about themselves that they want to explore, that to me is incredibly rewarding and beautiful because I do see a desire for people to want to know and connect more with their heritage. But they don't know what they don't know. You don't know where
mhm,
to begin. And I think, a great inspiration for me was my own mother and father. They grew up under a very unique time in Vietnam during the French occupation of the country. So France occupied Vietnam for about roughly a little under over 100 years, give or take. And my parents were part of this unique generation that they spoke French in Vietnam, actually better than they speak Vietnamese. They were very French. And I grew up with mostly French stories. My second language is French. My third language is English, actually. So it's kind of interesting, right? And like I started researching Vietnamese history and mythology for my own mother, right? Because it's usually the other way around, where the
mhm,
parents are telling the children the stories of their culture. But for me, it was like I wanted to give my mother this experience. And the catalyst for this, I think, the very deep catalyst was actually in SCAD. And again, this is nobody's fault. This is like no one. This is just the nature of geopolitical circumstances. But basically we had this assignment in one of my classes and the teacher was like, draw a story, a mythology from your culture. And other students were able to do it so beautifully and so eloquently. And I was like, had an epiphany moment, like, oh my goodness, I don't know a single one from my culture. Like I don't
mhm,
I only know French stories. I'm thinking of like Cyrano de Bergerac. I'm thinking of like, Bob le Bleu, Bluebeard in English. And I'm thinking of like all these French stories I grew up with. And I'm like, that's not Vietnamese though. That's
mhm,
French. And I went to ask my mother and I was just like, Mom, do we know any Vietnamese stories? And she's like, no, I don't. I grew up under the French colonial system. I don't know any. And I was just like, I didn't realize there was this hole in me. This It was like something that was robbed from me on an ancestral level that I didn't even know about until that moment. And I was like, if I'm feeling this, most certainly other people are, in my diaspora, but also to extend it to other diasporas. But,
mhm.
I don't really, I don't feel comfortable or maybe like it's appropriate for me to like, be that speaker or liaison for those communities. So if I can help out my community in any way, that's something that I can definitely feel comfortable doing while also promoting other creators that are helping out their communities in similar and adjacent ways.
Yeah, I was gonna say to that, Mom, that was
Man,
great.
that's good stuff
Yeah,
right
that was
there.
some real stuff
Man,
right
this is
there.
real stuff.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, the
You know,
accuracy.
you know what I told Min one time?
Mhm.
Min, I think you remember this. I told them that they remind me of Stay Sid from
Oh, yes.
because you can just every time we have because this our conversations are very sporadic. We're like, let's just like go back and forth for an hour really quick and then we just dip.
But these
So,
nuggets, right?
um,
It's the
but but
nuggets.
during those times, I found out that I was born in what was it? All I know is I'm an earth dragon or something. It was really cool. I think it was a year of the earth dragon. Like there's different, you know how there's years of
Hmm.
the dragon
Hmm.
or the tiger
Hmm.
or like, and then there's like I found out that there's like these different subsections in Vietnamese culture. Correct me if I'm wrong, then. But anyway, the point is stories like that will just pop up, and I think that just comes from you learn so much in such a
Hmm.
short period of time. Really.
Yeah, I think so too. But like, I also just like to share it with other people because I think that, I'm hoping that if I share, my love for history or mythology, I hope it inspires anyone to just look into their own history and their own mythology, wherever they can.
You do so much at the moment, right? You do graphic design work, and then you also do illustration work, and then you also mentor. How do you balance it
Oh.
all?
Honestly, lots of crying in between those. I'm kidding. No,
Stop, because that's me.
mostly just like um, no, I think like for me, what really helps is just to set parameters and boundaries for myself. And I tend to really just like overdo myself sometimes, where if I get really in the zone of something, I'm in the zone of it and I will just be in the zone. But then it's like, no, you cannot be. You're not in middle school anymore watching Naruto and then drawing for 4 hours at a time. You need to pay bills. So you need to set a timer for things. So basically, I have hard stops for myself where I will quite literally have a timer that will go off. And it's like, if it is 6 o'clock, I need to eat dinner. Because there are some times where I regrettably do not take care of my physical health as I should. And
Same.
I don't promote that with anyone, right? We should all be eating regular meals and we should all be regularly, getting fresh air as we need to.
Yep.
So I have implemented a system where it doesn't matter every single day. It doesn't matter how far behind I am, quote unquote behind or quote unquote ahead. I will make time to do some walking, meditation. I like to do some activities that will center me and ground me because if I'm not operating at the highest capacity, then it is a disservice to my students and it is also a disservice to myself and anyone I interact with.
Mm-hmm.
So I recognize that I'm interdependent on other people. I am not just an independent person. I Other people do depend on me and I depend on me. So um, having those boundaries, it helps me to maintain that sense of duty to myself, but also to others.
So well said. Someone that I follow on Instagram has a little cube timer, and I was thinking about getting myself one of those as well because I will get into the zone, get into a flow,
Mhm.
and look up, and it's 3 o'clock, and I haven't had lunch. So I
Mhm.
definitely get it. Sydney and I, we did an episode about time management, and
Mhm.
as a result of that, I've been timing my tasks to see how long they should take, and so I do feel
Mhm.
like you are preaching to me. But I do feel like for these tasks that I know they should take about X amount of time, a timer would be really, really beneficial just to give myself that space.
But I think like, another thing too, I don't pick an obnoxious timer. Like I know there's some timers
Yeah.
out there that are so obnoxious or like, ah. No, it's like a very soft timer for me. It's like just a
Right.
little
A gentle
ding. Like
nudge.
yeah, a little nudge. Yeah.
Right.
Because I can't stand those like 90s alarm clocks. Like, those giant, like
Yes.
robotic like blocks that we had in the 90s. It's
Yes.
absurd. It's madness.
You're
Like
right. No
how
one
loud
needs
they are.
that.
Okay, what is one of the biggest challenges that you've ever faced as an artist?
It's funny. I think if I could break this down into maybe two or three categories, I think for me it would be professionally and then academically and then like personally. I think that the biggest challenge professionally is just people coming to me. I call them the idea people, right? And I'm not calling anyone out in particular. This is a very standard client that I think a lot of people experience is that they come to you with an idea, like just a simple idea, but they come to you with no budget. They come to you with no solid grounding. They come to you with no anything. And then you have to be put in this very awkward position of being very transparent with them, saying like, hey, I'm going to need these things before you approach me. So it's like a lot of my clients and customers, they don't quite understand the parameters of being a client or customer for a freelancer. That can be somewhat tiresome at times, but I also am very compassionate, understanding that, it is a new space, especially for people who are
Mhm.
small business owners. My corporate clients, I don't see the same problem with it, but I think definitely the mom and pop shops, I have nothing but compassion for them because they are small business owners. They don't quite understand, like, the protocol of hiring a freelancer. So while I do have patience for it, it is also something that is tiresome for me.
Mhm.
So I think that is one thing that I think is a challenge for me because it's like, but the challenge, frankly, is not them. It's like the challenge of like, how do we educate them, right? Because it's
Mhm.
not their fault, frankly. It's like the challenge is like a bigger issue than myself. It's a bigger systemic issue. So it's a challenge for me, but I think it's also a challenge, frankly, for the whole industry, right?
Mhm.
Of how do we bring this information to the masses when art is already in the space that is devalued? Because it makes sense, right? If art is already devalued, you're not going to like, think to research how to approach an artistic
Right.
freelancer. You see me, it's not, so it's not even their fault. It's really just a deeper systemic issue, and they're just a side effect of a larger problem. So
Mhm.
that is one, I think. Academically, I think another issue that I have, a challenge that I have is, I think, it's funny, I was talking about this, and it's just like, I'm not picking on any one institution. This is a problem I've seen from primary education all the way to the graduate level, is two things. I think like the disrespect of anime art as a whole. I felt like it was a huge challenge for me to like relearn that like anime is an art form. First, it's just a medium, right? It's a medium, and it's inspired by a deep rooted culture, rooted in Shintoism,
Mhm.
rooted in Buddhism, rooted in, it doesn't, anime just doesn't pop out of nowhere one day. It came from somewhere. It came from a rich, diverse culture. And it's very frustrating when I see like art teachers from everywhere, from primary education to public schools to private schools, everywhere, just devaluing it. And it made
Mhm.
me feel like I need to be more Western with my art. And that was something that I'm constantly deconstructing all the time, deconstructing it. So that's a big one, I think. And then I guess maybe academically, another one is oh, I'm thinking maybe I'll come back to that one. I think that's the big one I think I have for
Mhm.
academics. And then personally, I think my greatest challenge is the time management. I mean, I talk a big game about the timer system, but boy, howdy, do I struggle with it. Okay, like I am
Yeah.
not perfect. I still struggle with time management a lot. I struggle with like a lot of artistic burnout, and I think the artistic burnout comes from the fact that artists today, they have to be more than just their craft. I was just talking about this with one of my friends, but we will never see another John Lennon again, or we'll never see an artist like we did in the 60s, 70s again, where John Lennon or like these artists from like that time period, they could be recluse for 6 months, 9 months at a
Mhm.
time to write their new album. And people aren't expecting them to update it on Snapchat or TikTok or this, that, and the third. They were allowed an air of mystery to them. But now we live in
Mhm.
this age where there's no air of mystery to being an artist. And that's
Mhm.
incredibly overwhelming, where visual artists are now put in this very unique space where they also have to be an entertainer. Like their personhood is now being transformed into a brand. So there's
Mhm.
Min Win the brand, and then there's Min Win the person. And that creates a very interesting cognitive dissonance in my
Mhm.
head and how I feel about my own personhood.
I have some things to say.
I need a cup of tea.
Yes, hold on. Let
Yes.
me.
You are killing it on the social media game.
Oh,
I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah. So I agree with you. I actually took like a break for a month just because it
Mhm.
was quite overwhelming to be like, new year, new me. Now let me come out with a whole bunch of stuff. Like that was just so much. And like you said, it is hard to I feel like okay, hot take, but I feel like being on Instagram and being on social media is almost contributing to the devaluation of art. I don't even know if devaluation is a word, but it contributes to that because then we feel like we have to push out piece after piece after piece, content after content after
Mhm.
content. And then I don't think people actually see the value of how long this piece actually
Right.
took. Like, yes, I'm making a 15-second video of me going through this, but this actually took me 20 hours to paint. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so I definitely agree that it has been detrimental to my mental health as an artist, and also just like I felt guilty for not posting. I felt guilty for going through phases of not creating, even though that's absolutely normal to go through phases where you're hyper creating and then when you're not. So it's a
Yeah.
strange world that we live in today. Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's absolutely a lot. And then when it comes to the anime art, as someone who is an anime fan,
Mhm.
I have to say, like, I think it's quite silly because I think there's a lot of animes that are absolutely beautiful, and it's not just
Absolutely.
Studio Ghibli. I know that that gets like
Mhm.
I love Studio Ghibli animation, but there's also so many other ones that are beautifully animated. Like if you watch Jujutsu Kaisen, their animation is really beautifully done. There's just so many ones.
Mhm.
So for it seems like, and this is something an opinion that I've had since I've graduated art school. When I look at art history, the only time they've mentioned like obviously like Japanese woodblock paintings and like different things like that, but most of the focus has been on westernized art. It hasn't been on what the Mayans were doing, what the Aztecs were doing, what other native tribes were doing. It hasn't been on what
Oh, those native tribes, they were all working with ancient aliens, don't you know? Like, that's what they were
Everyone knows.
doing.
everybody knows
Everybody
it.
knows.
Yeah, if it wasn't made by a Western person, it was obviously aliens.
Right. Like they did it with the Egyptians too.
It's the devaluing of like Western art, and it's
Mhm.
like how crude and absurd that it's like you have these entire history channels saying that it's made by ancient aliens. It's madness. It's just absolutely absurd.
It is. And my thing is just it makes me sad because there's no light
Mhm.
being shined on like Middle Eastern art. There's no light being shined on
Absolutely.
African art besides the Egyptians. Let's just be
Besides the
real.
Egyptians.
Like same thing with like Vietnamese art, Chinese art, even Japanese art because it goes beyond Japanese woodblock paintings. It goes like it's deeper. Filipino art, like so much art. Like you gotta be kidding me.
And
We're just
it's
focusing
really
on Western stuff.
and I think like for me, because I think we tend to, I can only speak from my experience, right, like very thoroughly, but like I'm Southeast Asian, and we have a very different history with colonization than our East Asian counterparts, right? I'm not suggesting that like they never experienced any kind of hostility or Western colonization, but it's not comparable to the colonization of South Asia and Southeast Asians. Like we experienced frankly the full totalitarianism of like Western colonization, to the point that our entire cultures have been shifted and changed. So for me, right, like I feel like art history, it doesn't focus on that, because I have this wild memory of this one girl in my high school. Like it was parents open house night, and it was my French class, and my parents came and spoke to the teacher in perfect French, because of course they speak to the teacher in perfect French. That's all they knew growing up. And then the girl the following day was just like, there are these two old Chinese people that came in speaking perfect French. How did they know it? And I'm like, that question right there is a problem, right? Because
Wow.
for you to assume that they're Chinese and not Vietnamese or Laotian or Cambodian off the bat, it tells me that your American education system is failing you, severely failing you, right? Because it's like that whole century of painful colonization was just like wiped out, like not being talked about. And that's a form of, like, I know maybe this is like a very like heavy word, but it's a form of like violence in of way to
Mhm.
erase a whole history like that so dismissively.
Absolutely. What has been the most rewarding moment
Yeah.
for you as an artist?
I think, a lot of artists, they see the idea so beautifully in their head, and then to put it on paper, right? Exactly the way you see it in your head. I think that's something that I had to unlearn, because there is exploration in that process. Because I always felt like a little bit of a failure, right? Whenever the idea wasn't perfectly encapsulated in the final product. But then that moment of discovery is where the beauty is. It's not about what you become, it's the action of becoming that is worth celebrating. And when you fully internalize that, that is when you're open to the greatest possibility of growth and the greatest possibility of
Mhm.
self-discovery, is in the action of becoming. That to me, in embracing becoming, the constant fluid motion of becoming, that is where I found the greatest joy in my art, and also just me as a person.
Ah,
Man, that's
that's
good
so
stuff.
good. You're so wise. I need to put you in my pocket.
Man, that's some good stuff. I'm going to re-listen to this one myself and take notes.
Yes.
Good
Oh my
Lord.
goodness. Because
Thank
this
you.
is
I feel
this
very
is
flattered at the moment. I'm only 29, but I feel very flattered by this. Like I thank you. I don't know what else to
You
but
are
say.
amazing.
you're 29 with a completely different perspective and
Mhm.
experience than what we have. Same with you, Mom. You have
Mhm.
a different perspective than what both of us have.
Yeah.
So it's like we
Mhm.
all bring something different to the table, and I
Yeah.
think that's why having these interviews is really refreshing, you know?
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say as well. Very refreshing.
So feel flattered,
I
as you
love it.
should.
As
Thank you.
you should.
We
We feel
appreciate it.
flattered to have this interview,
Yes,
have this conversation.
absolutely. So, if you could give some advice to the younger version of yourself,
This is a
what
good
would
one.
you tell yourself?
I would tell myself that I'm not a failure, and I am not, you know, I am not an afterthought. I am like a beautiful person, and basically, I think my younger version of myself, I had a lot of insecurities about, I think everything, man, like everything, everything, every feasible aspect of myself. I would nitpick, but that to me is just like, no, no. Like you're doing great. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
you're so hard on yourself. You're trying. And I think it was just because like, growing up, I was not like a conventionally attractive child. I was a very like, you know, very plus size child. I had the bowl haircut. Like I think that I was one of like only like 4 or 5 like Asian kids in my school, but I also was in remedial classes. I was in something called early intervention programs. So that's the technical term for it, EIP for short. And
Mhm.
I just let other people define my personhood for me. And relinquishing that control to other people is a losing game. It is a losing game. So I think that for me, I was not born like broken. I was born a whole person. My mom would tell me that I'm not, I'm a soul. Like I'm a living, breathing soul and I am a lineage. And I think when I internalized that, that's when I found the greatest liberation for my own peace and my own mental well-being. So I think to my younger self, I would say that you are the most powerful little thing because I wouldn't exist today without you. I'm also connected and interconnected with my every version of myself, led up to this moment. And it's that action of becoming
Mhm.
that is an ongoing experience. So every version of myself, with all its flaws and all of its, or all of their flaws and all of their shortcomings, are it's the art of becoming. And I think there's beauty in there.
Ugh, Mom, it looked like you're about to cry.
Oh, I love the art of
I don't want to
becoming.
do this.
I love it so much.
I, you know, I relate to what you said because I feel like now I'm in the part of my 20s where I'm actually relearning a lot of things or unlearning
Hmm.
things because as someone who also looked different in school, like I don't think I,
Mhm,
for the most part, I was the only person with albinism in my school.
mhm,
It can be really difficult to, and it can be easy to overanalyze ourselves because other people were overanalyzing
Hmm.
us, right? And
mhm,
projecting maybe their ignorance onto us. Like it's okay
mhm.
for us to be ourselves. And I'm kind of learning that now that it's every little quirk and little
Yeah.
bend, it's okay.
Right.
I think like, like in the early 2000s and even to this day, I see the word cringe being just excessively thrown out. Like the word cringe is like a catch-all for like anything that just doesn't conform to the most bland milk toast version of like society standards. Like I remember, growing up in like the 2016 era in like my undergraduate degree, like a popular thing on the internet was something called cringe compilations. And for me, I watched those and who was being featured in those cringe comps, right? It was people who were neurodiverse, people who were LGBT, people
Mhm.
who were just a little bit more passionate about something than societally acceptable. And I'm like, if that's cringe, let me be cringe. I would rather be cringe than cruel, I would rather be cringe than like, shoot someone down for just being passionate, right? So I think that it's our quirks that make up our humanity. So yeah, embrace them. You'll be freer, you'll be
Absolutely.
happier.
Yeah, like when you think about any like trailblazer out there, they were cringe.
Yep.
Most famous people, happily famous people, by the
Yep.
way,
Are
but
cringe.
most people who have made something or invented something or done something that they believed in, most of the time there were people who said that they couldn't do it or that it was
Mhm.
cringe or that it was weird or that they should just get a do be more realistic.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So I think being cringe is awesome. I know I'm cringe and I'm so cool with it.
When you're cringe, you're free, bro. Like just be cringe.
Yeah. Okay, our last artsy question is what is some advice that
Okay.
you would give to any aspiring artist out there, someone who's thinking about maybe going to school for art but is on the
Mhm.
fence, doesn't know they can do it, or someone who's trying to find their style, someone just who's a baby artist?
A baby artist. Okay, young baby artist out there. Whoever. Um listen to your old Mima, all right? Old Mima Min. I've been in this rodeo for a minute now. So I guess for my young babies out there, I would say that a couple of things. I would say maybe number one is that not everyone is going to work for Time Magazine, The New Yorker, this, that, and the third. And you know what? That is okay.
Yep.
There is space for you in this world. This market is massive. It's ginormous. I picked on the New Yorker and New York Times because I wanted to work for them at one point, but and maybe I still do, who knows? But don't tie yourself to just one thing. You limit your opportunities, right? You limit yourself. You limit doors close when you say, hey, that door's not for me. No, leave that door open. It's for you. Every door is for you. Try it out, right? Experiment, try new things. Number two, I would say, is that your art isn't going to be for everybody. And that is okay too, right? Like, and it shouldn't be for everybody, because if it's that inoffensive, I mean, like, who is it for? Like, no, it's going to be for a market. Appeal to your market, find your space and appeal to it, right? For me, my space happens to be, it's a very Asian style art. And, it's not just Asian people following my account, it's everyone that's interested in that space. And that is beautiful. That's okay. Be cringe about your space, right? If you're really into like cowboy art, boy howdy, I'm here for it too. Like, get me hype for it, bro. I'll be cringe with you, right? When someone's really like, I have a really good friend of mine who draws like alien art. Shout out to Chris, I love you. But to be frank, like, and Chris knows this, I'm not that into aliens. But man, has that gentleman got me into aliens, right? Because he's so passionate about it. So your art's not going to be for everyone, but show it off anyways, and you will turn some heads. You will convince me. You will turn me into your fan, right? So that's okay. Number three is, I would say, take advice with grace, dignity, like, with constructively, right? Unless if it's like, someone's just being like a really big jerk. But like, if someone is giving you constructive advice, it is not a personal attack. It really isn't. And I know that's hard for me to take. I remember when I was first starting off, it felt like, because art is, like, as Sydney said, it's a very personal experience, right? So it is not an attack on you. It is an attack on, not even an attack. It's just like a critique of your form, your composition, your colors, et cetera, et cetera. Those things do not define who you are as a person. They just define, the direction in which your art could potentially go if you, take this advice or don't. So that's something to consider, is just to take advice with grace. That was hard for me. That was really hard for me. Like, I will be fully transparent about that. I would say number four is that, yeah, you will encounter artistic labor that is disrespected. You will encounter that. Like, just be prepared to encounter your labor being disrespected. But that does not mean that you as a person or you as a professional deserve less respect. You are a real working professional. This is a real job. You deserve respect for your time, your labor, your energy. And I think for a lot of young artists and a lot of artists who are still working in this industry, because our labor is so devalued, it makes us almost devalue our own personhood. Never go into that rabbit hole. That's a very dark space. Don't go down there. You have value in your art, and the art that you do is a combination of all the hours you put into this craft, but also the accumulation of all the lives that you've lived on this earth. That is what you're putting into your art, and that is sacred. So don't ever forget that, ever, right? It doesn't matter if you get like 2 likes on your post. Doesn't matter if you get 10,000 likes. It doesn't change the value of what you put into that piece. I think the fifth thing I would have to say is stay hydrated. Like, seriously, just like, take care of your health, take care of your space. Like, just, if you're not physically well, your art. Oh gosh, like, hate's a strong word, I know, but like, I cannot stand this trope of like the tragic artist makes the best art. No, like, and I hear that all the time. It's like, oh, like, this was a tragic artist, they make the best art. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. Depression is serious. Anxiety is serious. It's not going to, quote unquote, make better art. That's absurd. That is a horrible stereotype. And I want that stereotype to be diminished in every single facet of this industry, in every single facet of like the like people who don't do art. I hear people who don't do art say it more than people who actually do art, but I need that attitude to be gone. So don't ever listen. So if anyone ever says that to you, do not listen to them at all. And please take care of your mental health. Please stay hydrated, and please be cool out here. I guess just it's okay. It's gonna be okay.
That was some good advice.
Solid.
Solid. Okay, Min. So first, we have to ask you the question that our last guest. We're like paying it forward. They ask a question, and then we ask you, and then you ask someone else a question, but you don't know who the person is. Okay. So this person asks, "How do you feel about cats?"
Hold on, is my baby right here? Hold on.
Oh,
Baby
where?
sleeping right
Oh my
there.
gosh! Oh my gosh! I'll cuddle up. That's how I want to be.
Yes.
How
Right
do
now.
I feel about cats? I mean, I have this angel sleeping next to me, this little being who, chews on my toes and fingers every day. This little freeloader who I love, this little light of my heart, this little gremlin that eats all my cockroaches. I love her. I agree with every ancient culture that worship cats. Bring back tradition. Like, just I'm here for it. I love cats so much. I think that honestly, I kind of envy her lifestyle. It's just so sweet. Like, she's just so soft. I just love all cats. I love every single cat. There's no such thing as a bad kitty for me. They're all perfect angels. I love every single last one of them. If I could adopt every cat, I would. So yes, that is how I feel about cats. I have very strong opinions about cats.
Cool. And now you could ask a question for our next podcast
Ooh.
guest.
Oh gosh. Okay. Next question is I'm a bookish person. I'm a very big reader. So to my next guest, whoever they may be, is what is your favorite book that you are currently reading and favorite genre?
All right. And then where can people find
Let
you?
them know.
Oh, where can they perceive me? I cannot be a recluse artist in this world, can I? So you need to perceive me, right? So you can go and find me on Instagram. My handle is min_for_the_win. So it's my name, Min Win, but like, Min for the win. It helps people pronounce my name. So yeah.
This was so great.
Yay! Well,
Great.
it was
Thank
so
you.
amazing to have you on, and yeah.
Thank you for listening to Leaf Notes. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and drop a like and a comment letting us know what your takeaway was. And if you're just listening, head over to social media after taking a screenshot and tag us letting us know what your takeaway was. If you want to give us a rating, head over to your favorite podcast app and give us a 5-star rating or let us know what you think. This will help us connect with more business owners and creatives just like you. And with that being said, we hope that your business takes root and grows, and we'll see you next time.